Thank you everybody for being here tonight. I'm really excited to share with you my experience of body-centered psychotherapy, a bottom-up approach to healing and growth. So without any ado, we'll just get right into it. So the agenda of things that I'll be talking about tonight is the philosophy and the benefits behind body-centered psychotherapy. And I'll just wait till I get to it. The introduction to the practice of mindfulness, what mindfulness is, what it isn't, and we'll do a mindfulness practice here as well. The organization of experience, theory of change. So the organization of experience, I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about the principles of body-centered psychotherapy. But basically, the theory is that each person is a living system who has organized around their experience in the best possible way that they can. So whatever patterns each one of us carries, and we all carry a unique pattern, that is our organization of experience. And there are very good reasons for why we hold the patterns that we hold. So how do we, as a therapist, how do I approach a person who wants change? I want to understand how they're already organizing around their experience. So that's reflected in their beliefs, the emotions that they deal with, whether they deal with a lot of anxiety, whether they deal with numbness, or any range of emotions, or it also includes their physical body. And that's the bottom-up piece that I'll be talking a lot about, that our organization of experience is reflected in our bodies. So whatever our psychological issues are, there are patterns in our musculature that reflect those issues, those psychological issues. And there are patterns in our nervous system that also reflect those psychological issues. So it's deeply respectful, and it can be very transformational because it comes from a very accepting approach, that I'm curious about your experience. I'm curious about how this tension feels in your body, and having some dialogue around what's happening in the body is usually a good place to start, but not always. So we'll talk about the intricacies of the difference between top-down, and I'm not saying this is just bottom-up. It's bottom-up and top-down. So they dovetail together, and the choices that I make as a therapist on what to make contact with, whether I'm making contact with a person's beliefs or their emotions or what I'm tracking in their bodies, is based on what's happening in the moment. And that's why mindfulness is so important. I think I lost this connection. Oh, there it is. So these are the things you don't think about when you plan to give a presentation. There are things you can prepare for, and there are things you cannot prepare for. And this room is very much it lends itself very well to me being a talking head and like a lecture style room. But what I'm hoping is that you will have questions and comments, and that it can be more of a dialogue and more engagement in the room together. So then we're going to look at a case scenario of a fictional client, which will just give us an opportunity to talk about what is my top-down approach with this client, what is the bottom-up approach with this fictional client, And we'll finish our session together today with an experiential inquiry into the connection between the mind and the body. So, any questions or anything up until this point? Okay, so what is body-centered psychotherapy? It's a form of therapy that honors the unity of mind and body, and it supports awareness and transformation. So the body is a lot of things. The body is our senses, what we call in sensorimotor psychotherapy the core organizers, what we see, what we feel, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste. That's part of our body physical experience, our sensations, our movements, our gestures, the balance that we are feeling in our body. Maybe we are favoring one side of our body more than another. Maybe there's more tension in a certain part of our body than another. This can be reflected in our posture and our spine. I'm always reminding myself to do this, because when I get nervous, in my body, this is what happens. I collapse, because it's kind of like about hiding, or anyways, that's another story. But just to illustrate how our feelings are reflected in our bodies. So through this approach, we can become aware of our patterns, and hopefully, it needs to happen in a mindful way, because it has to be done when you're sharing some insight with a person about a pattern that you observe. If they feel criticized, it's not going to go over very well. So it really has to be within a very safe and connected relationship, where we can start to talk about patterns. Like I can start to talk about with the person I'm working with a pattern that I observe. And where does this come from is, for one thing, a man named Wilhelm Reich, who lived between 1898 and 1957, and he was a teacher of Anna Freud, the daughter of Freud, and his contribution to this body-centered psychotherapy is really huge, because through him we came to know that, like I said before, psychological issues are identical with patterns of muscular tension and dysregulation of the nervous system. Any comments or questions so far about that? So he came up with two theories which are interesting to me and kind of help me navigate my work a little bit. A theory of armor, and the second theory being character. So armor is what we have in our body in the form of a pattern of muscular tension in our body that protects us from external stimuli that we feel we need to protect ourselves from. So if there's a threat, armor is helpful. It can also be helpful in protecting us from our own impulses, from things that we're not ready to say or do. So ideally, and his theory was and is that the armor should be flexible. It should be something that we can put on when we need it and be aware that we're doing that. And we can also relax it when it's going to get in the way of connection. So when it becomes chronic, when it becomes a chronic pattern, then it does get in the way. And a lot of times we're not conscious of these patterns of armor that we're carrying. And character is his other theory, which has to do with our early childhood experiences. So so our developmental relationships and the types of attachment relationships that we experience as a child. So if as a child a person was dealing with repeated stress in their relationship with their primary caregiver, they could not go safely to receive soothing when they needed it. That will be reflected in their character. So those early relationships play a huge role in the formation of character. Ideally, in a secure attachment relationship, we have a parent who hears our signals, interprets them accurately, and responds appropriately. But if that wasn't the case, that would be an insecure attachment relationship or a disorganized attachment relationship, and that would be reflected in our character. Any questions or comments? Yes?
Can you give a bit of an example about how that might go?
Yes. Like, let's say from my early attachment relationship, I'm carrying around the belief that my feelings don't matter. So that belief, my feelings don't matter, might make me kind of collapse or, walk around with my hands like this. Different patterns. Or it could be a bulldozer. My feelings don't matter, therefore I'm going to just be really hard and really abrasive. And that's the thing I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is how what a person does with their experience is so unpredictable. There's a mystery to it. You could know the parts of a person's life, but how they organize that experience, how they organize around that experience as a whole expression of a person, you can't predict that. And that, to me, is positions me with some therapeutic humility. Because I can't know what's good for this person. I'm not the expert here, but I can support them to be curious about patterns. Any comments or more comments or questions?
Joelle, will you be sending out your PowerPoint presentation?
Anyone who wants it can write down their email address here, and I can send a PDF version of it. Okay, so the benefits of body-centered psychotherapy are enhanced awareness of the present moment, and an accepting attitude towards the body. So a lot of times we have strategies that help us to avoid the present moment because it's uncomfortable or it's unpleasant. So this would be an opportunity through mindfulness to start to have a new relationship with those sensations, with those feelings of discomfort. Mindfulness is a really great way to have a new relationship with our experience. I'll be talking more about that. It's good for cultivating resources for safety and grounding. And I'm using that word resources, and where that comes from is from Pat Ogden's work, Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, which is a treatment for trauma. So in sensorimotor, exposure is not seen as beneficial in processing trauma unless a person has enough resources to process the trauma. And those resources come from titrating a person's experience. Like, for example, it's a whole process of trauma treatment, which I'm not going to get into in any great detail right now. But just to say that trauma is a specific map which affects the brain in a very special way that requires helping a person to stay in the present moment. Because with trauma, a person's body is remembering trauma. So for the person who has post-traumatic stress disorder, they're actually still in the trauma. Their brain is still in the trauma. It can come and go based on triggers. So bringing them into the present moment through sensorimotor is developing resources in the body, also resources in the body that have to do with perhaps their connection with nature, if that's what resources them, or their connection with certain key relationships, or it could be certain movements that resource them, certain pressing their back into a chair. It's a process of discovery with the individual person. What is it that resources them? So that comes from sensorimotor psychotherapy. Any questions about that? So it's also helpful in regulating disruptive emotions. So just helping a person to feel more able to manage what comes up by working with their attention to bring it more into mindfulness, to bring it more into the present moment, to bring it more into those things that resource them. It's the opposite. Mindfulness is the opposite of avoidance. So that's the new relationship, because when we avoid things, they tend to get stronger and have more of a grip on us, because there's a lot of energy that we have to mount to avoid. So this approach is the opposite of avoidance. And it supports the therapeutic relationship, especially through two things I'm going to be talking about are the skills that I use in body-centered psychotherapy. One of them is tracking, and I'll talk about that, and another is contact, making contact. So, just a question for all of you, if anyone would like to share their thoughts on how might awareness of the present moment influence a person's state of mind? Any ideas? Yes.
Because during trauma, or people with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, as you were saying, the trauma, it keeps going on and on and on.
Yeah.
Bringing more attention to the present could be kind of a way to distance from that, bring them back into here and now,
Exactly.
as opposed to there and then.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was a really great point. So what she said was, in case you didn't hear, is that for people who have experienced trauma, their body still remembers that trauma. So they are carrying some of those symptoms of hyperarousal. So that's more activation, more anxiety. They may be experiencing somatic symptoms in their body that feel not right to them, and on some level are reminding them that they're not safe. Or they can experience hypoarousal, which is numbing and withdrawing, and at its extreme it would be dissociation. So yeah, and some really important thinkers about trauma would be Daniel J. Siegel and Bessel van der Kolk. His work, and Peter Levine is a good go-to for trauma, and of course my favorite, Pat Ogden, sensorimotor psychotherapy.
It would also, I would think, being mindful and being in the present would also allow the person to be with what is going on differently. Because if they're activated in the past, they're going to respond to it from that place, whereas if they bring forward, they might be able to respond differently to themselves and what's going on.
Yeah. Did everyone hear that? Yeah, that I can't say that as well as you did. I'm sorry, but I really appreciate your comment. And I'm noticing I've lost my, there we go. Okay, so the foundational principles of this approach are organicity, mindfulness, nonviolence, mind, body, spirit, holism. Help me as a therapist to have a therapeutic lens that orients me to see a person's resources and their capacity for healing, and to follow their natural processes, to not have so much of my own agenda about what should happen, but to try to understand how they organize their experience and the patterns that are helping them or have helped them to manage their world. And again, to see their patterns as their very best efforts to navigate their world. So it's not about putting those patterns down or dismantling those patterns. It's really just about being curious about those patterns in a way that they can receive that curiosity. So these principles were developed by Ron Kurtz, who's the founder of the Hakomi method of therapy, and he has a book called BodyCentred Psychotherapy. So if you want to read more about these principles, and he also talks about character strategies, which is quite interesting. And Pat Ogden, the founder of Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, was co-founder with Ron Kurtz of the Hakomi method. So there's a connection, and these foundational principles are also the principles for sensorimotor psychotherapy. So organicity. So a person is a living system with the capacity for growth and healing. And that process that they're in is self-determined, it's self-organized, they're engaged in the world, and that's how these patterns come about, is through engagement, through participation. So this is a picture of the African pixie frog, and it makes its own mucus sac. It lives in the savanna, the African savanna, and during a drought, it can actually make its own mucus sac so that it won't die of dehydration. And so it can live in this mucus sac for up to 7 years until the rain comes, and then the rain will just melt the mucus sac. So I thought he's a really good example of organicity and how his living system has organized around the stresses in his world. Yeah, so again, the patterns have a logic to them. There's a logic to the strategies that we develop. So there's a logic to this strategy of developing a mucus sac to stay hydrated. So a person can learn about how these strategies, whatever they are for an individual person, actually influence their relationships and influence the thoughts that they're carrying and their beliefs about themselves. And they can also explore, and this would be something that I might do with someone that I'm working with, is explore the pattern on purpose. Do it on purpose and maybe exaggerate the pattern, which is kind of like you're taking over the pattern from the pattern. So gaining some agency around that pattern, and then exploring what's it like to let this pattern go. And some emotions might come up. It's very scary, or maybe quickly followed or slowly followed by a feeling of release, a feeling of freedom. Yes?
Can you give an example of how you exaggerate or explore the patterns?
Sure. Well, let's say the pattern is that a person who's had some trauma in their life has an involuntary pulling in their leg when they get nervous. They can try to do that on purpose, and they can try to do it slower, or they can try to do it with the force coming in rather than going out. They can try, and this is very sensorimotor, they can try pushing against something, sustained pushing with their foot to take over that pattern in a different way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so what do you hope to gain from doing that?
Well, for the body, it could bring a lot of relief. Right? When this thing is happening in your body, and it could be that this thing started because you were trying to run away, and you couldn't run away because you were too scared or you were too little. And so getting that agency back in the legs through pushing could be like a precursor movement to running away. So it could feel really good, and it could lead to more understanding about the movement and about what that person needed at that time that wasn't available to them, so they could have a new experience. Okay. So nonviolence. So everybody pretty much knows the inspirational story of Mahatma Gandhi, and the quote here is, "Nonviolence is born of an attitude of acceptance and active attention to the way events unfold naturally. It works hand in hand with mindfulness, which helps us to understand without interfering." And that's from Ron Kurtz's book, BodyCentred Psychotherapy. So when I can position myself as someone who embraces this principle of nonviolence, then I don't have to change a person. I don't have to fix a person. That my role is to support their natural processes and support their inner wisdom to emerge in gaining more freedom from the issues that they're dealing with. So that point about having acceptance, bringing acceptance is really important, and that active attention and non-interference. So I'm not the expert, and I'm just here to be curious with you. And you can think about what it's like. I'm sure you've had the experience, most of us have, when someone was really trying to change the way we think, or really trying to change some behavior in a very active way. They're usually not very successful in getting us to change. So it doesn't feel good to be pressured to change. So I think this principle is really really good in therapy as well, as a therapist, to adopt this nonviolence. And here's where it actually dovetails with yoga and yoga philosophy, because one of the yamas in yoga philosophy is ahimsa, nonviolence. So those principles I learned as a yoga therapist, they fit very well with body-centered psychotherapy. Right. So does anybody, here, we'll go to the next slide. So it's the idea of change without force. Again, defenses are seen as best efforts to manage their experience. They're strategies to help the person navigate their world. And the therapist is there to provide opportunities to explore them more deeply when there's willingness, when there's readiness, when it's a natural evolution in the conversation and in the relationship. So I'm wondering if any of you have any comments or ideas about this concept of change without force.
I work in a harm reduction homeless shelter, so we support people where they're at, so it's very much the same concept.
Yeah. So just, they have to decide how much harm it's causing them and how much change they want to make. Yeah. Thank you. So, mind, body, spirit, holism. So it's the recognition of a complexity, and I mentioned this earlier, the inherent unpredictability of the whole by the parts. And each aspect influences all the other aspects. So we are each a unique expression of our parts. And a good example, I think, is if you look at a person who is really comfortable in an academic setting, and they're really comfortable with thinking and analyzing and writing and being in that realm of themselves, that's a very, they're privileging that aspect of themselves, and that's their comfort zone. Whereas somebody else who's like a dancer or a carpenter, who's very tactile, who really works through the body and doesn't have a lot of interest for the world of ideas. They want to experience the world in a different way. So this, to me, connects with mind, body, spirit, holism, because in recognizing that each one of us is a unique expression and does privilege certain aspects more than the other, as a therapist, I can also be curious about how those experiences have resourced the person, how privileging that aspect of themselves has been a resource to them, has strengthened them, has helped them in their resilience. And I can also be curious about missing experiences too. Any thoughts on this? Yes?
I just wonder, besides being curious, would you also try to influence the change or no?
It would have to come through these principles. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but it's so specific to the person I'm sitting with, to the kinds of conversations that we've had so far, to the mood that they're in that day, to their level of motivation for change. I really would want it to come from finding out what their motivation was.
With like minimal influence from your part.
Pardon?
With like minimal influence from your part. You want to observe the person in their like natural process.
Yeah, I would want to know what they want. Like, what are their goals? What are their goals for change, and how is their pattern serving those goals, and how is their pattern making those goals harder to reach? Yeah. Yeah, and then that lens of just honoring the mystery and the uniqueness of each person. I want to bring that into the room as much as I can. And then unity, so the process of communication. The parts, how well does the person's parts communicate with each other? For example, and this really relates to, I have a love for Gestalt therapy, which is a very embodied therapy. It's very much about what's happening in the body, the sensations, the impulses, the movements, the gestures. And so through Gestalt therapy, which was developed by Fritz Perls, we can also understand that we have different parts of ourselves. We have different voices. We have a critical voice. We have a voice that's feels beaten up by the critic. And so that critic can be a very domineering part and a very domineering voice. So the communication then between the person and the critic, if that's not there, that critic is taking over, and the person might be doing things like saying yes when they want to say no, or saying no when they want to say yes. And so that, I think it's helpful with this as well. Okay.
We're gonna try turning the lights on.
Okay.
If you can't see, let us know.
That looks
Yeah.
fine.
Is that
That
okay?
is much better.
Yeah, I was feeling it too. That feels better, actually. Yeah. So belonging is really important with unity. Like in the therapeutic relationship, bringing unity to the therapeutic relationship communicates to the person, or they can sit with a feeling like, I'm in the right place, I'm with the right people, I'm supported, and my voice and my feelings matter. So again, that goes back to secure attachment. Maybe they have a belief that their voice and feelings don't matter. And the kind of attachment that the kind of attachment relationships that we had influence our brain, because the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, it learns to relax when we feel securely attached. As long as we are feeling insecurely attached, it's going to be in a state of hyperarousal, and it's going to be really more difficult to bring that prefrontal cortex online. You see me doing this with my hand. This is Daniel Siegel's hand model of the brain. This is the amygdala, limbic system, brainstem, and this is the cortex. So being aware of a person's early attachment experiences is also important in the therapeutic relationship. It helps me to know where they're at. Any more comments or questions at this point? I'm seeing some tired faces. How's it going? Talking a lot. We're getting to mindfulness. We're going to get a break soon. So mindfulness is that quality of attention which notices without choosing, without preferences. It's like the sun. It shines on all things equally. So, and how this works, I think, is if I have the belief that things never work out for me, I'm really going to notice evidence that things don't work out for me. And I'm going to miss out on the evidence of, actually, you know, things do work out for me, and I do a good job. And so mindfulness is not privileging that belief, because in mindfulness, we're just aware of awareness. That's all. And the content is just, you know, showing us back, bringing us back to awareness. As soon as we notice ourselves getting into the content, pursuing it, it's time to acknowledge that and let it go, and that's the practice of mindfulness. And what happens in our body when we can let go and get into mindfulness? That muscular tension, that pattern that we are normally occupying, there's relief from that. So does anyone here have any thoughts about mindfulness? I have a definition here. So mindfulness is a tool that we use to study ordinary consciousness. So it's a way of being with our experience in a different way, and being with ordinary consciousness in a different way, rather than being recruited by all our beliefs and being controlled by them. Mindfulness is bringing awareness to them, so that we're actually in the seat of the witness with those core beliefs, and it allows our inner wisdom to emerge. So paying attention in the present moment on purpose without grasping onto judgments. That's mindfulness. It's also an accepting attitude towards our experience. It's embodied. So I find when I'm practicing mindfulness, it really helps me to become aware of what I'm hearing in the room. It really helps me to become aware of the quality of light on my eyelids. Things like that that bring me into the core organizers, which are the senses, actually help me to deepen my experience of mindfulness, which is why I feel it is a very embodied practice. And in some of my, I give workshops on mindfulness as well, and we do an eating meditation, and we do a walking meditation, which is very interesting for people. Like I had one person tell me that I couldn't believe, like, when we were doing the walking meditation, I was just getting so angry that people were walking so slowly. So, you know, and she got to experience that. And because she was there to unfold mindfulness, that wasn't a problem. That was something that she could have a different relationship with her reaction rather than being hijacked by it. And wouldn't it be great if, you know, people on the road would do more of that in their cars, myself included. Okay. Yeah, so does anybody have any thoughts or comments about mindfulness? Maybe you've had a different experience of mindfulness?
I think it can be, a lot of these preconceptions around mindfulness can be, I work a lot with youth, so part of the time I work with couples and singles, relationship stuff, and part of the time I work with youth, and so specifically with youth, they have a very short attention span a lot of times.
Yeah.
I know it can be enhanced, but there's so many misconceptions, right? That, oh, I have to achieve it perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, I have to quiet my mind of everything.
Yeah.
I have to, you know, the only experience they've had is some anime character levitating, you know.
Yeah.
Like, what do I, or when I do it with children as well, like, yeah, like, I have to be a monk. I have to achieve like this monk-like perfection, and I think a good first part of my session is trying to unlearn those beliefs.
Yeah, dispute them and
yeah.
like
So I wonder
dispute
what
them.
your experience around like the best way to introduce mindfulness to beginners is.
Well, I don't know what the best way is, but I think you just said it. Like if you kind of know what people's challenges are before you get started, you can address them in the beginning. Yes.
Yeah, and I was just reading a book by Elisha Goldstein, and he had in the very beginning, he has an exercise for practicing this, and he says every time your attention wanders, that's good. You're doing the exercise.
Because you're noticing your attention.
Well, and it's supposed to wander.
Yeah.
Think of it like a puppy. So it's going to wander, and then you get to bring it back. And the whole point of the exercise is to bring it back. So every time it wanders, you're succeeding.
Yeah.
And bring it back.
That's a
Beautiful.
really nice reframe.
Yeah. That's great. Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment to what this gentleman was saying, because I work with youth quite a lot, and I actually find children are more curious, and so I find it easier to introduce the mindfulness to them because they have that heightened sense of curiosity, whereas adults have more ingrained patterns and beliefs, and they find it more difficult. But that also may be because I work outdoors and I'm able to utilize nature a great deal, and so it is easier to access when you're in nature.
It is. I find that too. I mean, even making these slides and getting pictures, there's a lot of nature pictures, because every time I saw a nature picture to put on here, I thought, oh, this will be helpful. They won't fall asleep. Yeah. So what mindfulness is not, it's not our default mode. It's not just focusing on what we want and what we don't want, what we like and what we don't like. It's not focusing on what others are doing and or not doing, and what we like that they're doing and not doing, or the world. It's not our opinions, and it's not our really quick reactions to things like, oh, I know what this is. So, And we have to have that default mode. We can't be in beginner's mind every second of every day. I don't think, anyway. Sometimes we need the shorthand. Okay, you know, when I do my shopping, I know exactly where the bread is. I know, you know, it's like I can be a little bit on autopilot. So it is helpful, but it's also helpful to get out of that and to really feel things very authentically in the moment, just as they are. It's quite restful, like it's quite restorative. It has a restorative quality to our attention when we can get there. Oh, and this was has anyone seen that movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty? It's a good movie. I recommend it. And there's this moment in the movie where this photographer character, he's gone all over the world, and he's finally made it to Nepal in search of this very rare snow leopard. And he's got his zoom lens on the snow leopard. And this other character, Walter Mitty, has gone to great lengths to be next to him at that moment, and he's not taking the picture. And Walter Mitty says, "Aren't you going to take the picture?" And I could feel like that anticipation in my body, and I'm sure it was in his body as well. So, and what he said was, if I like a moment, I mean me, personally, I don't like to have the distraction of the camera. I just want to stay in it right here. Like, to me, that really, that gets the mindfulness piece for me, is like he drops his ego, he drops, you know, all the motivation to get this amazing photo that will be published in the, you know, the greatest magazine, and he'll be paid lots of money for it. So in that moment, the moment is so valuable to him, infinitely more valuable than the material view of the leopard. He just wants to experience it. So that's what we're going to do right now. Okay. How many people found that too long? Nobody. Okay, good to know. So I guess we're going to have to do it again. So this is more on the organization of experience. So mindfulness is a helpful tool in bringing awareness to how we respond to our environment, our habitual responses that have been influenced by our developmental beliefs, in some cases traumatic experiences. We can also bring awareness to our physical patterns, the quality of our breath, the quality of our musculature in certain places, and how our beliefs influence our physical structure and our patterns, the feelings that we have in the body. So bottom-up awareness is how our physical patterns influence our emotions and our thoughts and our beliefs. That's bottom-up. I'll talk more about that. And top-down is how our cognitions, our thoughts, our beliefs influence our bodies. That's top-down. So cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about that triangle of our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior. But this is another piece. We're talking about, okay, you have that thought or you have that feeling, what's happening in your body? And not everybody wants to talk about what's happening in their body. And this isn't for every person. And some people, it takes a long time for them to feel comfortable with that question, what's happening in your body? So it's important that, for me, that I am aware of who's in front of me. And sometimes I make mistakes, and I might try something that totally doesn't work. And That happens. But that's how I learn about the person in front of me, too. I didn't know that that was really uncomfortable for you to, notice what's happening in your body. But that could be a conversation, too. And here's a nice quote and nice picture. Moshe Feldenkrais, who's a father of a form of movement therapy called Feldenkrais. Very helpful way of moving for happy bodies. Says, you can't do what you want until you know what you're doing. Any questions or comments up to this point? Okay, so here's the scenario. So a woman comes for therapy for help dealing with the stress caused by her relationship with her mother. She experiences physical pain in her stomach. She experiences severe constipation at times, and also a lot of tension in her jaw, her neck, and her shoulders. So a top-down intervention is about what you think, what you feel, and what you do. And so there's huge value in top-down interventions. I want to stress that again. This is not about, my title was a bit misleading, a bottom-up approach to healing and growth. It can't just be bottom-up. Because with top-down, I can express empathy. I can practice reflective listening. But there's some bottom-up in there too, because as I'm practicing reflective listening, I'm also tracking what's happening in a person's body while they're talking. Are they starting to get more tense? Like with this client, she talks about her mother, and she starts to talk faster, and she starts to get tighter, and she has some symptoms happening in her belly, a tightening in her belly and a jamming in her thigh. So I would want to be tracking that. And then listening to mirror her words, her emotions, and her physical experience. I wouldn't copy her physical experience, but I would be listening and noticing it, and it would be influencing me and what I say next and where I might choose to go with her. I would want to amplify her strengths and resilience. That's also top down. What's gotten you through this? How have you coped with this? It sounds really overwhelming. It sounds like you've gone through a lot of pain. I want to learn about those strengths and resilience. And then top down is also psychoeducation about the relationship between physical symptoms and emotions and psychological issues. So, I might say, I noticed that as you're talking about your relationship with your mother, that you seem to be getting more tense. Is that what's going on? Is that what's happening for you? And from there, the conversation could be about, yes, when we're talking about something that's very emotional, our body can start to reflect that reflected in muscular tension and movements in our bodies and gestures and impulses. And once we start to notice this relationship, we can not only talk about what's hard and what's bothering you and the emotions and the difficulty in this relationship, but we can also work bottom up, because maybe when you feel more relaxed and less activated by talking about your mom, you could have a different experience of your relationship with your mom. But as long as it's talking about it is getting you so activated and more tense and and exacerbating symptoms, maybe it's not helpful. Maybe this isn't helpful to talk about this. Would you be interested in exploring some mindfulness? And I would want to explain to her what mindfulness is. Maybe tell her how it's been helpful to me or other clients that I've had. And of course, top down is also gaining consent. Are you interested in this? Does it resonate with you? bottom up. Oh, sorry, yes?
Quick question, you said you wouldn't mirror what your client is doing physically.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, I might, but part of me feels like it might also exacerbate tension for her. Like, you know, if she's like, you know, doing this and I'm doing this and she's doing that and I'm doing that, like, I also want to be a model for her of being calm and being relaxed, and so, you know, within reason, you know, and using intuition. I never have my clients do headstand, by the way. That's just, it was a joke. Bottom up. Yes?
So you were saying that you don't mirror what the clients are doing. Do you do the opposite thing too? If they are tensing up and not recording, but they're tensing up, do you kind of non-verbally communicate the opposite?
I think I automatically tense up when they're tensing up in front of me, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is definitely how I track what's happening in my body in response to what's happening in their body. But I wouldn't, like, on purpose mirror exactly the level of tension that they were mirroring, I don't think, because I think that would not be helpful to them. Yes?
Can I recommend a really good resource?
Sure.
On that? Jennifer Kalari is a social worker and a counselor, and she's worked with really difficult, like, children in gangs and youth in gangs, stuff like that, and the parents. So she trains the parents. So what I really like about it is that she simplifies a lot of our complex language about, like, empathic attunement and everything like that, and shows specifically how parents can kind of provide a best friend response. So yeah, you're not mirroring exactly the tension or doing certain things to make the person more aggravated, but if a child is, let's say they knock over their Lego, you would be there and like, oh, that's awful, that really sucks, and the kid would, it's really interesting how the kid will then start to calm down versus, oh, we'll fix that, we'll fix the Lego up, like, and you'll see a lowering instead when a person isn't attuned to, and I see that in my practice too, is especially youth, their volume and their action is basically turn it up louder, repeat the message until I get that response. And you're not going to have a perfect response right away. It's taken me a long time, and I still miss a lot of the time. But my youth, I guess, trained me over time to have a better response, a response that tunes to the attachment relationship that they've always needed.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Would you write her name down for me before you go?
I'll tell you, the spelling is Kolari. Yeah, she has a lot of YouTube stuff.
Okay. Yeah. And so I guess it also depends on the age of the person you're working with as well. You know, that could be a way to join youth.
I think it really worked because she talked about the first time where she really felt like there was that really good match, that really great best friend response, and that was actually her supervisor responding to something that she said, and it radically kind of changed the way that she thought about therapy. So certainly it could work with coworkers, adults, anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I have experience, you know, you asked me, Andrea, was it?
Yes.
You asked me if I would do the opposite, and I've actually seen that doing the opposite doesn't feel good to the client. Like, it actually feels like I'm separating. You know, like if they're doing this and my back's starting to hurt me, and I'm like, you know, trying to do this for myself, they might experience it as a withdrawal, a drawing away, a separating. Yeah. So tracking is an important tool of body-centered psychotherapy. I mentioned that, tracking what's happening in her body, tracking what's happening in my body, which helps me to track what's happening in her body. And this includes everything from the quality of the person's voice, gestures, facial expressions, right up to their boundary style. So how available are they what is their body saying? Is their body saying, I'm open? Or is their body saying, stay away? And their beliefs and their movement. So I'm tracking that. And I can track it in a way that's passive. I can track it, notice it, but not say anything. Or I can also bring it to their attention if I think they can integrate it. So that's important. Because a person will only benefit from it if they can integrate it. And that's why timing, mindfulness, the principles I've been talking about, I hold those with me as a lens to help me make those choices of what to track, actually verbally share with them. And then making contact, what to make contact with. So contact is, I could make contact with her statements, her emotions, her beliefs, what I observe happening in her body. And again, it can be verbal and it can be nonverbal. So when you lean in, that's a way of making contact that's nonverbal, leaning in, nodding my head, but the whole idea is to create an atmosphere of acceptance, understanding, and trust, and to attend to the therapeutic relationship between us through those things, through tracking, through contact. It's about the relationship. And so one way to do that is to offer simple, acknowledging statements that mirror her words, her emotions, and her body experience. So I'm going to give you some examples of contact statements. And this comes from Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, that it's through that approach, it's always better to keep it simple, to not ask questions. It's better to just use a simple statement. The idea being that if it's a question, we have to think about it, so we have to go back up. So it would be different, it would have a different effect if I said, is your belly tightening while you're talking about that time with your mom when she went, right? Then they'd be like, oh, is it? Wait, let me go up here and find out and think about it. As opposed to, belly tightening right now? Just simple. Or emotions, lots of emotions right now coming up. Or words, you didn't feel supported after that. Or beliefs, you never feel good enough. So. Or sensation, where do you feel that sadness in your body? Okay, so that's a question. But sometimes questions are helpful. So in the Sensorimotor, there's what we call mindfulness questions. So that would be a mindfulness question. Where do you feel that sadness in your body? Or do you feel that sadness here? Yes?
I was just curious, because you mentioned mindfulness a couple of times, and what's the relationship between mindfulness and meditation? Would all meditation be mindful, or is it that mindfulness has a different way of connecting to the body?
That's a great question. Did everyone hear her question? So her question was, is mindfulness the same as meditation? Is that your question?
Or if all meditation is mindful?
Is all meditation mindful?
With the relationship of the body?
Yeah, is all meditation mindfulness? I don't think so. I know there's very, diverse meditation practices. Some people meditate with a mantra. They're breathing in with the mantra, breathing out with the mantra. Some people do different breathing practices that are more activating. Some people have deities that they are meditating on. So meditation has lots of different ways of expressing it, the practice for different people. But in terms of I feel that you can bring mindfulness to studying what's happening in the body. And that's definitely what I learned through sensorimotor psychotherapy. In that therapy, mindfulness is the foundation for studying what's happening in the body. Because as long as, and this is where it also dovetails with yoga. In yoga, one of the niyamas is called swadhyaya, and it means self-study. So mindfulness helps with self-study, because when you're identified, we use that word identified, when you're mixed with what you're looking at, you can't really see it. So you have to be the witness in order to see things clearly. And that facilitates swadhyaya, it facilitates self-study. And so I can also make contact with the relationship between us in the moment, such as, you know, let's say it was sadness. Can you stay with that and stay with me? And that comes from AEDP, Diana Fosha's work, Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, a beautiful therapeutic approach that really privileges the relationship and has beautiful ways to do that. So I want to be aware of my tone and my pace so that I'm not going too fast for someone or not going too slow. Wherever possible, I want to help the person to feel more calm and have more pleasure in the moment. That's a resource for them. It's definitely very important for people who have experienced trauma. They need a lot of that. So the last piece is just how do I integrate yoga therapy in my work? So for this client who has a lot of pain in her stomach and a lot happening in her stomach, and her nervous system is very keyed up around this issue with mom, I might say, I notice that when you talk about your mom, you get very activated. You seem to get more tense. And what would it be like if you could talk about your relationship with your mom in a mindful way? So she would already have a reference point for what mindfulness was by the time I said this. And what would it be like if you could learn some skills to manage what comes up in your body? And then if she consented and she thought that was a good idea, I might offer to give her the opportunity to lie down on a yoga mat, to have a bolster under her knees, to have a roll under her neck, to have a blanket on her body. I might have her make contact with her breath and do some deep belly breathing to just relax her and bring her nervous system down. If she felt comfortable and safe, I would see if it would be okay if I could put my hand on her belly, and I would want to track with her what that's like and what comes up with that connection happening, that physical touch. I might even encourage some gentle movement, like opening up the breathing muscles, so opening up the diaphragm, opening up the intercostal muscles between the ribs, so that could facilitate her breathing more, and release, maybe some movement to release tension in her neck and her shoulders. She would understand how that fit in with what we're doing, and she would be interested and willing to do that. So the last point being, it's a really collaborative process, and decisions about which direction to go are made together with the person. And it's also based on what I observe, what I track, and what I know about the person, including their armor, their character, and their goals for treatment. So I have one last thing for you before we're done. I hope that you have time to give me feedback. I know there's feedback forms for the BCACC, but I would really like to know how this was for you, and yeah, just get a sense of whether I could have been more clear about certain aspects of the presentation. That would be helpful if you have time. I have some, they're here, and I have some pens, and I have some business cards and postcards. I'm doing a workshop called a Women's Creative Empowerment Circle. There's a poster here about this, and you can talk to me about it if you're interested. So I'm just going to ask you to stand up, please, if you're comfortable to stand up. If not, you could do this sitting down. So just, we're going to do a mind-body inquiry. So you can go into your mindful place again, whether that's with your eyes closed or with just softening your gaze, maybe looking down so you're not taking too much in right now, except just the feeling of being present on your feet. So just finding that resource which for you brings you into mindfulness, whether that's the breath, and if that was helpful before of making contact with the heart and belly, you can do that. You can soften the bend in your knees so they're not locked or jammed. Just feeling yourself in relationship to the ground, releasing your weight down, but also getting some energy coming back up through the spine. So I'm going to give you a statement, and just try to make yourself like a clear mirror, or like a lake without a ripple right now, so that you can observe how this statement ripples through you. So the statement is, I'm not good enough. So what happens if you tell yourself, I'm not good enough? Maybe your chest tightens a little bit. Maybe your head goes back or forward. Maybe your belly tightens. Maybe there's just a little bit of tension happening in the hands, like almost the beginning of a fist. And then take a breath to exhale and let that go completely. Take a couple more breaths to just completely let that go, and come back to that lake without a ripple. And now I'm going to give you another statement in that place where you're that lake without a ripple. Notice how this statement resonates in your body. I can do anything. I can do anything. What happens when you tell yourself, I can do anything? Maybe there's a lifting of the spine. Maybe that's not a comfortable statement. Maybe there's a drawing away. Just noticing. Noticing what it's like for you in your body. I can do anything. And then letting that go the next couple of breaths. And coming back into the room and fully occupying your senses, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, maybe the cloth on your body, maybe the air on your skin. Thank you.